Season of Thanks. A Sweet Thanksgiving Romance. Written by Susanne Ash. Chapter 1. Mara Winslow sat in her car for a full minute after turning off the engine, staring at her parents' weathered beach house. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the wraparound porch, and the familiar sound of waves crashing against the shore should have been comforting. Instead, her stomach churned with the same anxiety that had followed her all the way from Savannah. "You're 29 years old," she told herself. "You can handle house-sitting for a week without falling apart." She grabbed her duffel bag from the passenger seat and climbed out, the salty breeze immediately whipping her hair across her face. The November air was cooler than she'd expected, but it felt good after the stuffiness of her car. She'd driven with the windows up and the radio loud, trying to drown out the voice in her head that kept replaying Brad's words, "I just can't see a future with you, Mara. You're amazing, but..." The but had been the killer. There was always a but. Mara shook her head and marched up the front steps, fishing the spare key from under the ceramic turtle her mother had placed by the door. The house smelled like sea salt and the vanilla candles her mom loved, instantly wrapping her in childhood memories. She'd lived here since she was born, and later, every holiday break from cosmetology school. But this was the first time in her adult life that she'd come home because she had nowhere else to go. She dropped her bag by the front door and headed toward the kitchen, planning to make herself a cup of tea and figure out what she was going to do with the rest of her life. The sound of running water stopped her cold. Someone was already here. Mara's heart hammered as she crept toward the kitchen, her mind racing through possibilities. Had her parents' cruise been cancelled? Did her brother stop by? She rounded the corner and froze. A man stood at the kitchen sink with his back to her, broad shoulders filling out a navy Henley, dark blonde hair slightly mussed. He was rinsing out a coffee mug, completely at home in her parents' kitchen. "Excuse me," she said, her voice coming out sharper than she'd intended. He turned around, and Mara's breath caught in her throat. Landon Kerr. Her brother's best friend looked exactly the same as he had the last time she'd seen him. No, that wasn't right. He looked better. The years had filled him out, adding definition to his shoulders and a few lines around his blue-gray eyes that somehow made him more attractive. He wore his confidence easily now, like a man who'd grown into himself. "Mara." His voice was deeper than she remembered, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. "I wasn't expecting you until later." "I wasn't expecting you at all," she replied, setting her purse down on the counter with more force than necessary. "What are you doing here?" Landon's mouth quirked up in a half-smile that was annoyingly appealing. "Colton didn't mention I'd be staying here? My place is being fumigated. 3-day process." He gestured toward the coffee maker. "Want some?" "I just made a fresh pot." Mara blinked, trying to process this information. "Colton didn't say anything about you staying here." "Probably slipped his mind. You know how he is." Landon leaned against the counter, completely relaxed, as if finding your best friend's little sister in your temporary kitchen was an everyday occurrence. "How long are you here for?" "The week." She crossed her arms, suddenly aware that she probably looked like a mess after the 3-hour drive. Her hair was definitely wind-blown, and she hadn't bothered with makeup this morning. Meanwhile, Landon looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine for rugged coastal living. "I'm house-sitting while Mom and Dad are on their cruise." "Right. The anniversary cruise." He poured coffee into a second mug without asking and held it out to her. "So we're roommates for a few days." The word roommates made her stomach do something complicated. She accepted the coffee, careful not to let their fingers brush. "When did you get here?" "About an hour ago. Just got back from letting the fumigation guys into my place." He took a sip of his coffee, studying her over the rim of his mug. "You look good, Mara." "Different." Heat crept up her neck. "Different how?" Different like she'd grown up, or different like she'd clearly been crying in her car for the past week? "Thanks," she managed. An awkward silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant sound of the ocean and the hum of the refrigerator. Mara found herself staring at the scar along his jawline. It made him look dangerous in a way that was definitely not helping her composure. So, she said finally, 3 days? That's what they said. Should be ready Tuesday evening. He paused, his eyes searching her face. Unless that's a problem. It should be a problem. The last thing she needed right now was to be stuck in close quarters with Landon Kerr, especially when she was feeling vulnerable and he was looking better than any man had a right to look. But she couldn't exactly kick him out when Colton had already offered him a place to stay. It's fine, she lied. The house is big enough. Good. His smile was warmer this time, more genuine. It'll be nice to catch up. It's been 2 years since I've seen you? 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, but who was counting? Something like that. Landon nodded, apparently unaware of her precise mental calendar. Well, I'll try to stay out of your way. I know you're probably here to relax. If only it were that simple. Mara forced a smile. Don't worry about it. Like you said, the house is big enough for both of us. Even as she said the words, she wondered if any house would be large enough to contain the tension that was already crackling between them. This was definitely not how she'd planned to spend her week of soul-searching. But then again, nothing in her life was going according to plan these days. The small grocery store was exactly as Mara remembered, with its ramped aisles, creaky floors, and the same hand-lettered signs that had been there since she was a kid. She was studying her shopping list when a familiar voice called out behind them. Well, well. Look what the tide washed in. Mara turned to find Miss Doris approaching, her steel-gray eyes bright with curiosity and something that looked suspiciously like mischief. The older woman hadn't changed a bit. She still wore the same perfectly coiffed silver hair, and the same knowing smile that suggested she was always 2 steps ahead of everyone else. Miss Doris, Mara said, accepting the woman's enthusiastic hug. How are you? Oh, I'm wonderful, dear. Miss Doris stepped back, her gaze shifting between Mara and Landon with obvious interest. And Landon Kerr, as handsome as ever. What a lovely surprise to see you two together. We're not, Mara started. We're shopping, Landon finished smoothly. I'm staying at the Winslow place while my place is being fumigated. Ah yes, termites are such a nuisance. But how convenient that you're both here. Miss Doris's smile widened. I was just thinking about how much help we'll need for the community Thanksgiving meal on Wednesday. You know how these things go. Never enough hands to peel potatoes and set up tables. Mara felt a familiar sense of being maneuvered into something. Miss Doris had always been the island's unofficial social coordinator, with an uncanny ability to volunteer people for things they hadn't realized they wanted to do. I'm sure you have plenty of folks to help, Mara said carefully. Oh, we always need more. Especially young, capable people like yourselves. Miss Doris turned to Landon. You helped with the setup last year, didn't you? I moved some tables, Landon admitted. Exactly. And Mara, I remember how beautifully you arranged the flowers for the church fundraiser a few years ago. Such an artistic eye. Miss Doris clapped her hands together. It's perfect. You're both free Wednesday, aren't you? Mara opened her mouth to make an excuse, but Landon spoke first. I should be. My house will be ready Tuesday, but I don't have any major projects starting until next week. Something in his tone suggested he wasn't in any hurry to leave the beach house, which did absolutely nothing to help Mara's peace of mind. Wonderful. Miss Doris beamed. Mara, dear? Mara looked at Miss Doris's expectant face, then at Landon, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. She could say no. Should say no. The whole point of this week was to figure out her life, not get tangled up in community events and whatever complicated feelings Landon Kerr stirred up in her. I suppose I could help, she heard herself saying. Excellent. Miss Doris practically radiated satisfaction. We start prep work at 9. The community center kitchen. She paused, her eyes twinkling. You know, it's funny how things work out. Here I was worried about having enough help, and the universe sends me the perfect pair." With that pronouncement, she bustled away, leaving Mara staring after her. "Did we just get railroaded?" Landon asked. "Completely." Mara turned back to her shopping list, trying to ignore the way her heart was beating faster. 3 days of avoiding Landon had just become impossible. Miss Doris is a force of nature. Always has been. Remember when she convinced the whole senior class to help with the church rummage sale? By telling everyone their grades would improve if they did community service? And then somehow making it actually fun. Landon grabbed a shopping basket. "At least this time we know what we're getting into." Mara wasn't so sure about that. But as she watched Landon grab a box of cereal, sleeves rolled up and looking perfectly at ease in the familiar setting, she had the sinking feeling that she didn't know what she was getting into at all. Chapter 2. Landon woke to the sound of drawers opening and closing in the kitchen below. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to Mara move around downstairs, and tried to ignore how domestic it felt. How right. Which was dangerous thinking, considering she'd be gone by the end of the week. He pulled on jeans and a t-shirt and headed downstairs, finding her standing on her tiptoes to reach something in the upper cabinets. Her hair fell in loose waves down her back, and she was wearing yoga pants and an old Palmar Island turkey trot shirt that had seen better days. "Need help?" he asked. She startled, nearly dropping the coffee filters she'd been reaching for. "I've got it." Clearly. He stepped behind her, his chest brushing her shoulder as he easily grabbed the filters from the top shelf. The scent of coconut drifted from her hair, and he had to resist the urge to lean closer. "Here. Thanks." She took the filters without looking at him, her cheeks slightly pink. "I forgot how tall these cabinets are. Your mom always complained about that too." Mara busied herself with making coffee, and Landon found himself watching the efficient way she moved around the kitchen. She'd always been like that. Purposeful, no wasted motion. Even as a kid, when she was following him and Colton around, she'd kept up without complaint. "So," she said, not turning around, "what's the plan for today?" "I've got some paperwork to catch up on." "You?" "I thought I'd pull out some of Mom's old photo albums. She asked me to organize them while they're gone." Mara glanced over her shoulder. "Fair warning. There are probably embarrassing pictures of you in there." "I'm not easily embarrassed." She raised an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." An hour later, they were sitting at the kitchen table with photo albums spread between them and steaming mugs of coffee. Mara had been right about the embarrassing pictures. There were plenty of shots of him and Colton as gangly teenagers, all elbows and bad haircuts. Mara laughed, pointing at a picture of Landon at 15, shirtless and grinning beside the dock. "Look at those abs. Or lack thereof." "I was a late bloomer," he said dryly. "Not all of us can peak at 16 like your brother." "Colton definitely peaked early." She flipped the page, her smile softening. "Look at this one." The photo showed the three of them on the beach, Mara probably 10 years old and positioned between him and Colton. She was grinning at the camera, missing a front tooth, while he and Colton had their arms slung around her shoulders. "You were such a pest," Landon said, but his voice was fond. "I was adorable," Mara corrected. "You guys loved having me around. We tolerated you." "Liar." She bit her lip, studying the picture. "I thought I was so cool, hanging out with the big kids." Landon's gaze caught on the way her teeth pressed into her bottom lip, a habit he remembered from when she was younger. She still did it when she was concentrating or nervous, and something about that continuity hit him square in the chest. "You were cool," he said quietly. "Cooler than us, anyway." She looked up at him, surprise flickering across her face. "Really? Really? You never complained when we dragged you on those long bike rides. Never cried when you got scraped up." He paused. "Well, except that one time." "Which time?" But her expression suggested she already knew. "The bike accident. When you went flying over your handlebars near the boardwalk." Mara's hand unconsciously went to her left knee, where he knew a small crescent-shaped scar still marked the spot. You carried me all the way home. You were bleeding everywhere. I thought your parents were going to kill me for letting you get hurt. Instead, Mom made you stay for dinner and fussed over you for taking care of me. Mara's smile was soft now, distant. I had such a crush on you after that. The words hung in the air between them, and Landon felt his chest tighten. He remembered the way she'd started looking at him differently, following him around with starry eyes. He'd been careful to treat her like a little sister, knowing anything else would have been wrong on multiple levels. You were 12, he said. 13, she corrected. And completely hopeless. You were sweet. Something shifted in her expression. Sweet. Right. Landon could hear the edge in her voice and knew he'd said the wrong thing. Sweet was what you called someone's kid sister, not a grown woman sitting across from you looking like everything you'd been trying not to want. Mara. Oh, look at this one. She flipped to another page, effectively ending the moment. Remember when Colton thought he could water ski behind that tiny motorboat? The subject change was clearly intentional, and Landon let her have it. But as they continued looking through photos, he found himself stealing glances at her profile, noticing the way the morning light caught the auburn highlights in her hair, the small scar on her chin from another childhood mishap. She wasn't that little girl anymore, hadn't been for years. But sitting here with her, surrounded by memories of summers and holidays and lazy afternoons, it was easy to forget that she'd grown up. Easy to forget that she'd built a whole life in Savannah, a life she'd presumably be returning to. Easy to forget that he'd watched her drive away once before, and it had taken months to stop looking for her car every time he passed her parents' house. Landon? Mara's voice broke through his thoughts. You okay? Yeah. He cleared his throat. Just thinking. About what? About how you smell like coconut and sunshine. About how I'm in serious trouble if I keep thinking about the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. Nothing important, he said instead. But as Mara turned her attention back to the photos, Landon had the uncomfortable realization that nothing about his feelings for Mara Winslow had ever been unimportant. And that was exactly the problem. Tuesday afternoon found Landon hauling folding tables into the community center instead of moving back into his place while Mara directed traffic with the efficiency of someone who'd organized her share of events. She'd pulled her hair back in a ponytail and rolled up the sleeves of her flannel shirt, looking completely in her element. Tables go along the north wall, she called out, pointing toward the windows that overlooked the harbor. Miss Doris wants the buffet line to flow from the kitchen. Yes, ma'am, Landon said, earning himself an eye roll. Don't yes, ma'am me. I'm younger than you. Could have fooled me with all the bossing around. Mara stuck her tongue out at him, and Landon had to bite back a grin. This was the Mara he remembered, quick-witted and unafraid to give as good as she got. If you two are done flirting, Miss Doris called from across the room, we still have decorations to hang. Both Mara and Landon opened their mouths to protest, but Miss Doris had already bustled away, leaving them staring after her. We weren't flirting, Mara muttered. Definitely not, Landon agreed, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. An hour later, most of the setup was complete except for the garland that needed to be strung along the ceiling beams. Mara surveyed the room, hands on her hips, then grabbed one of the folding chairs. I can reach it from here, she said, climbing up. Landon watched her stretch toward the beam, the chair wobbling slightly under her feet. Mara, that's not stable. I've got it. She stretched higher, the garland just out of reach. The chair tilted, and Landon moved without thinking, his hands closing around her waist to steady her. She was warm and solid under his palms, and he could feel the slight tremor that ran through her at his touch. Careful, he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. I'm fine. But she didn't pull away, and for a moment they stayed frozen like that, her hands on the beam above, his spanning her waist, both of them acutely aware of every point of contact. Well, isn't this cozy? Colton's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Landon's hands dropped from Mara's waist as if he'd been burned, and he stepped back, putting distance between them. Mara climbed down from the chair, her cheeks flushed. "Colton," she said, smoothing down her shirt. "I didn't know you were coming by." Miss Doris called in reinforcements. Colton set down a stack of folding chairs, his gaze shifting between his sister and his best friend with an expression Landon couldn't quite read. Not angry, exactly, but definitely paying attention. "Figured you could use some help." "We've got most of it handled," Landon said, crossing his arms. "Just the decorations left." Colton nodded slowly, his eyes lingering on Landon for a beat longer than necessary. The message was subtle but clear: "I'm watching. Colton Winslow, as I live and breathe." Miss Doris appeared beside them, beaming. "How lovely to see you. And how nice that all three of you are helping. Like old times." "Happy to help," Colton said, accepting Miss Doris's hug. "Though I have to say, it's nice having Mara back on the island for a while." "Oh yes," Miss Doris agreed, her eyes twinkling. "It's wonderful when young people come home. Sometimes a change of scenery is exactly what we need." Mara shot Miss Doris a look that suggested she knew exactly what the older woman was hinting at. "It's just temporary. I'm only here for the week." "Of course, dear," Miss Doris said in a tone that suggested she didn't believe that for a second. "Though Palmar Island has a way of growing on people. Isn't that right, Colton? You moved back after college." "I did," Colton agreed. "Best decision I ever made. Though I'm still working on the personal life part." He grinned at his sister. "At least I'm not the only single Winslow anymore." "Says the guy who hasn't brought a date to a family function in 2 years, Mara shot back. Miss Doris's eyes lit up with interest. 2 years? My goodness, Colton, what's wrong with the women around here?" "Nothing's wrong with them," Colton said quickly. "I'm focused on my career right now." Miss Doris looked thoroughly unconvinced. "Well, don't wait too long, dear. The good ones don't stay single forever." Landon caught the way Miss Doris's gaze flicked meaningfully between him and Mara, and he had the distinct feeling they were all pieces on a chessboard she was moving around for her own amusement. "I should get these chairs set up," he said, grabbing a stack. "I'll help," Colton offered, following him toward the tables. They worked in silence for a few minutes, the easy rhythm of a friendship that had weathered 2 decades. But Landon could feel Colton watching him, waiting for something. "So," Colton said finally, "how's it going? Staying at the house?" "Fine. Mara's good company." "She is." Colton unfolded another chair, his movements deliberate. "She's also had a rough few months. Bad breakup, left her job. She's pretty vulnerable right now." The words hit their mark. Landon set down the chair he was holding and looked at his friend. "Meaning?" "Meaning she's my sister. And you're my best friend. I'd hate for things to get complicated." Landon felt something cold settle in his stomach. "It's not like that. Isn't it?" Colton's voice was mild, but his eyes were serious. "Because from where I was standing, it looked pretty friendly." Before Landon could respond, Mara appeared beside them with an armload of tablecloths. "What are you two whispering about?" "Nothing," both men said in unison. She looked between them suspiciously. "Right. Well, when you're done with your mysterious man talk, these tables need to be covered." She walked away, and Colton clapped Landon on the shoulder. "Think about what I said, okay?" Landon watched Mara spread tablecloths with quick, efficient movements, and tried to ignore the way his hands still tingled from the memory of her waist under his palms. He was thinking about it, all right. That was exactly the problem. Chapter 3. The community center's kitchen buzzed with pre-meal energy, volunteers bustling around massive pots and calling out instructions over the cheerful din. Mara tied an apron around her waist and surveyed the controlled chaos, breathing in the scents of sage and roasting turkey. The annual community Thanksgiving meal was just hours away, and the excitement was palpable. "Mara." Miss Doris appeared at her elbow with a mesh bag full of potatoes. "Perfect timing. We need these peeled and cut for the mashed potatoes." Think you can handle 20 pounds? 20 pounds? Mara hefted the bag, surprised by its weight. How many people are we feeding tonight? Oh, you know how these things go. Plan for 50, get 75. Miss Doris patted her arm. Landon's already started on the sweet potatoes. You two can keep each other company. Of course he was. Mara looked across the kitchen to find Landon at the prep counter, sleeves rolled up and a pile of orange and purple sweet potatoes in front of him. He glanced up as she approached, his knife never pausing in its steady rhythm. Morning, he said. Ready for duty? As ready as anyone can be for 20 pounds of potatoes. She dumped the bag on the counter beside him and grabbed a peeler. Please tell me you're faster at this than you used to be. Used to be? Landon raised an eyebrow. I don't remember ever peeling potatoes with you. The summer I was 16. Mom made us help with the church potluck. You complained the entire time about how your knife skills were better suited to fish than vegetables. I did not complain. You absolutely did. You said, and I quote, "This is cruel and unusual punishment for someone who can fillet a redfish in under 2 minutes." Landon paused, a half-peeled sweet potato in his hand. You remember that? Mara felt heat creep up her neck. She remembered a lot of things about that summer, the way he'd looked in his faded t-shirts, how he'd started treating her less like a kid and more like an actual person. I have a good memory, she said, focusing intently on her potato. Apparently. His voice was amused, but when she glanced over, his expression was thoughtful. For the record, I've gotten better at vegetable prep. Prove it. What followed was the most ridiculous potato peeling competition of Mara's life. They worked side by side, trading increasingly absurd trash talk about technique and speed, while volunteers bustled around them carrying trays and calling out updates on cooking times. Mara found herself laughing more than she had in weeks, her earlier nerves about being in close quarters with Landon dissolving into easy camaraderie. You're going the wrong direction, Landon said, nodding toward her technique. Long strips, not little circles. Excuse me, I'll have you know I've peeled a lot of potatoes in my time. Like when? I worked in a restaurant kitchen one summer during cosmetology school. The head chef was very particular about his potato prep. She bumped his shoulder with hers. Also taught me how to handle sharp objects around difficult people. Difficult? Landon clutched his chest in mock offense. I'm the easiest person to work with on this entire island. Says who? Says everyone. I'm known for my excellent attitude and cooperative spirit. Mara snorted. Since when? Since always. Ask anyone. I'm asking you to pass me that bowl, and you're ignoring me. Landon reached for the metal mixing bowl she'd been pointing toward, but his elbow knocked into hers, sending the bowl clattering to the floor. They both moved at the same time, their hands colliding as they reached for it. Mara's breath caught. Landon's hand was warm over hers, calloused from years of construction work, and she could smell the faint scent of his soap. Something clean and woodsy that made her want to lean closer. When she looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse skip. Sorry, he said quietly, but he didn't move his hand. It's okay, she whispered back, though she wasn't sure what she was agreeing to. They were leaning toward each other, the noise of the kitchen fading into background static, when someone squeezed between them carrying a massive turkey. Excuse me, lovebirds, the volunteer said cheerfully. Hot bird coming through. Mara jerked back, her face burning as Landon quickly retrieved the bowl and handed it to her. The moment was gone, replaced by the bustle of meal preparation and the acute awareness that they'd almost kissed in the middle of a crowded kitchen. she started. Landon. A voice called from across the room. We need you for the fryer setup. Mara watched as he was pulled away toward the back door where several men were wrestling with what looked like industrial cooking equipment. She tried to focus on her potatoes, but her hands were shaking slightly, and she kept stealing glances at the group outside. Problem with the fryer? Miss Doris appeared beside her, following her gaze. I don't know. Looks complicated. Men and their toys. Miss Doris shook her head. Though I have to say, Landon's good with that sort of thing. Very capable hands. Mara shot her a look, but Miss Doris was the picture of innocence. Through the window, she could see Landon examining the propane connections while another volunteer gestured emphatically. There seemed to be some kind of disagreement about the setup, and she could tell from Landon's body language that he was getting frustrated. Without really thinking about it, Mara wiped her hands on her apron and headed outside. "What's the problem?" she asked, joining the group. "Gas lines not connecting properly," Landon said, glancing up from where he was crouched beside the fryer. "The fitting's the wrong size. Did you try the adapter?" Mara knelt beside him, examining the connection. "Looks like you need a quarter-inch reducer." The other volunteers stared at her. Landon raised an eyebrow. "How do you know about gas fittings?" "My ex had a food truck. I helped him set up at festivals." She stood up, brushing dirt off her knees. "There should be an adapter kit in the truck. Mind if I take a look?" 20 minutes later, the fryer was humming contentedly, and Mara was basking in the surprised approval of the volunteer crew. But it was the way Landon was looking at her, impressed and maybe a little proud, that made her feel warm all over. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked as they walked back toward the kitchen. "I told you. Food truck." "No, I mean really. That was more than just helping out. You knew exactly what you were doing." Mara shrugged, oddly pleased by his admiration. Brad was useless with anything mechanical. If I wanted to eat, I had to learn to fix things myself. "Brad's the ex?" "Yeah." She glanced at him. "He wasn't very handy." "His loss," Landon said quietly. Something in his tone made her look at him more closely, but before she could respond, they were back in the kitchen, swept up in the final preparations for the meal. Still, as they returned to their potato station, Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Something that felt a lot like possibility. The meal had been a success. Every last bite of turkey had been consumed, every volunteer thanked, every dish washed and put away. Now Mara and Landon walked along the beach in comfortable silence, each carrying a bag of leftovers Miss Doris had insisted they take home, along with an invitation to join her for another decadent meal tomorrow. The evening air was crisp but not cold, and the sound of waves against the shore provided a soothing backdrop to their footsteps on the sand. Above them, stars were just beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Good turnout tonight," Landon said, breaking the quiet. "Better than Miss Doris expected." Mara shifted her bag to her other hand. "Did you see how happy Miss Betty looked? I don't think she's been out much since her husband passed. Community meals matter here. Especially for people who'd otherwise spend the holiday alone." Something in his tone made her glance at him. "Is that why you help out? So you're not alone?" Landon was quiet for a moment, considering. "Maybe. I've got Colton, and your parents have always included me. But yeah, I suppose it's nice to feel like part of something bigger." They walked a few more steps before Mara found herself saying, "I used to think this place was too small. Too limiting. And now?" She paused, watching moonlight dance on the water. "Now I'm not so sure. There's something to be said for knowing your neighbors, for everyone showing up when there's work to be done." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I forgot how that felt. Savannah doesn't have that?" "Savannah has a lot of things. Great restaurants, culture, opportunities." She kicked at a piece of driftwood. "But not this. Not the feeling that you belong somewhere, that people notice when you're gone." Landon stopped walking, turning to face her. "People noticed when you left, Mara. Your parents talked about you all the time. Colton too. That's different. That's family." "Is it?" His voice was soft. "I noticed too." The admission hung between them, weighted with years of unspoken things. Mara felt her heart speed up, the same way it had in the kitchen when their hands had touched. "Landon. I'm not saying anything you need to respond to," he said quickly. "Just that you were missed." By more people than you might think. They started walking again, but something had shifted. The air between them felt charged, full of possibility and want and the careful dance of two people trying not to want too much. Their hands swayed as they walked, coming close enough to brush knuckles before pulling away, neither quite brave enough to close the distance. But neither moving further apart either. "I don't know what I'm doing," Mara said finally. "With my life, I mean. I quit my job on impulse, my lease is up at the end of the year, and I have no plan whatsoever." "Maybe that's okay." "Is it?" "Because it feels terrifying." Landon was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes the best things happen when we don't have a plan." Mara looked at him, walking beside her in the moonlight, steady and solid and everything she'd been too young to appreciate years ago. For the first time since Brad had broken up with her, she felt like maybe not having a plan wasn't the end of the world. Maybe it was the beginning of something better. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For making this week easier than I thought it would be." He smiled, the expression transforming his face. "It's been better than I thought too." They walked the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, the Winslow beach house coming into view with its warm porch light welcoming them back. As they climbed the steps to the front door, Mara found herself wishing the walk could have lasted longer. Wishing a lot of things she wasn't quite ready to name. Chapter 4. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and crisp, the kind of November day that made Landon grateful to live on the coast. He'd woken early out of habit, padding downstairs to find Mara already gone and a note on the coffee maker, gone to help with turkey trot registration. "Coffee's made." He smiled at the neat handwriting, then caught himself smiling and shook his head. He was in trouble. By the time he made it down to the starting line, the turkey trot was in full swing. Runners stretched and chatted while volunteers handed out race numbers and safety pins. He spotted Mara immediately. She was behind the registration table, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, efficiently checking people in. "Landon Kerr," she called out when she saw him approaching. "Please tell me you're here to volunteer and not to make fun of people in turkey costumes." "Actually, I'm here to register." Mara's eyebrows shot up. "You? Running? Voluntarily?" "I run." "Since when?" "Since always. I just don't make a big production out of it." He leaned against the table, grinning at her surprised expression. "Why? Think I can't keep up?" "Oh, I know you can't keep up," she said, pulling out a registration form. "And you can?" he asked. "I ran cross-country in college." "College was a long time ago." "Excuse me?" Mara pressed her hand to her chest in mock offense. "I'll have you know I still run 4 times a week." "Prove it." The challenge hung between them, and Landon could see the competitive spark light up in her eyes. It was the same look she'd had as a kid when he and Colton dared her to jump off the dock or climb the tallest tree. "Fine," she said, scribbling his name on a race bib, "but when you're walking the last mile, don't say I didn't warn you. When you're eating my dust, don't say you weren't given fair warning." Mara laughed, the sound bright and infectious. "We'll see about that, Kerr." 20 minutes later, they lined up with 50 other runners at the starting line. The 5K course wound through downtown Palmar Island and along the waterfront before circling back to the community center. It was a scenic route that Landon had driven hundreds of times but never actually run. "Last chance to back out," Mara said, bouncing on her toes beside him. "Not happening." The starting horn sounded, and they were off. Mara immediately settled into an easy rhythm that looked effortless, while Landon focused on not embarrassing himself. The first mile was fine. They jogged side by side, trading comments about other runners and pointing out island landmarks. By the second mile, Landon was beginning to understand why Mara had seemed so confident. "You doing okay over there?" she asked, not even slightly winded. "Perfect," he lied, trying not to let on that his lungs were beginning to burn. "Because you look a little red." "It's the crisp air." Mara grinned. "Sure it is." But instead of pulling ahead to prove her point, she stayed beside him, adjusting her pace to match his. They fell into conversation about island gossip, childhood memories, and whether Miss Doris really did know everyone's business before they did. "Remember when she accidentally told your mom that Colton was planning to ask Jenny Miller to prom?" Mara said as they rounded the turn toward the waterfront. "And your mom accidentally mentioned it to Jenny's mom at the grocery store?" Poor Colton. He spent 2 weeks working up the courage to ask her, only to find out she'd already bought a dress. They were both laughing now, the rhythm of their footsteps and the easy flow of conversation making the miles pass quickly. Landon realized he'd stopped noticing the burn in his legs, too caught up in the simple pleasure of spending time with Mara. As they approached the final stretch, Mara glanced at him with a mischievous smile. "Race you to the finish? You're on." They broke into a sprint, running side by side as the finish line came into view. Spectators cheered, and Landon could hear someone calling their names. They crossed the line at exactly the same moment, both breathing hard and grinning like idiots. "Photo finish," someone called out, and a camera flash went off as they stood there laughing, Mara's hand on his arm for balance. "Not bad for an old man," she said, still catching her breath. "Old man? I'm 4 years older than you." "Ancient." Landon was about to respond when he caught sight of the photographer reviewing the shot on his camera's display. In the photo, they looked like a couple, happy, connected, completely absorbed in each other. Something in his chest tightened at the image. "You two want a copy of this?" the photographer asked. "It's a great shot." Mara glanced at the camera, and Landon saw surprise flicker across her face. "That would be nice," she said softly. As they walked toward the water station, accepting congratulations from other runners, Landon found himself studying Mara's profile. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The slight flush in her cheeks from the run. The easy way she laughed at something one of the volunteers said. He didn't want this to end. Not the morning, not the easy companionship, not whatever was building between them. For the first time in years, he wanted more than just a safe, predictable routine. He wanted Mara to stay. They were both relaxing on the couch, scrolling through the turkey trot photos that had already been posted to the island's social media page. Mara had changed into leggings and an oversized sweater, her hair still damp from the shower, and Landon was trying very hard not to notice how the soft fabric brought out the green in her eyes. "Oh no," Mara groaned, holding up her phone. "Look at this one. I look like I'm dying." Landon leaned closer to see the screen, catching a whiff of her shampoo, something floral that made him want to bury his face in her hair. In the photo, she was mid-stride with an expression of determined concentration. "You look focused," he said. "Competitive." "I look constipated." "You do not." She swiped to the next photo. "Oh, but this one's better. We both look human here." It was the finish line shot. The one of the two of them crossing together, both grinning with the kind of pure joy that made something warm unfurl in Landon's chest. They looked good together. Natural. "We should frame that one," Mara said, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, if you want a copy. For your place." The slight hesitation in her voice made him look at her more carefully. She was studying the photo with an expression he couldn't quite read, her bottom lip caught between her teeth. "Mara," he said softly. She looked up, and suddenly they were closer than he'd realized. Close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose, the way her pupils dilated slightly when their eyes met. A strand of hair had escaped from behind her ear, and without thinking, he reached up to brush it away. His fingertips grazed her cheek, and she drew in a soft breath that he felt more than heard. The morning light streaming through the windows caught the auburn highlights in her hair, and he could taste the anticipation in the air between them, sweet and electric and inevitable. "We probably shouldn't," he murmured, even as he cupped her face in his palm. "Probably not," she whispered back, but she didn't pull away. He kissed her then, soft and careful at first, then with growing certainty as she melted into him. She tasted like coffee and possibility, and when her hands fisted in his shirt, he felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. Her lips were warm and soft under his, and the small sound she made when he deepened the kiss sent heat straight through him. When they finally broke apart, they stayed close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. Landon's heart was hammering against his ribs, and he could feel the fine tremor in Mara's hands where they still gripped his shirt. "We probably shouldn't," he repeated, but his voice lacked any real conviction. "No," she agreed breathlessly. "Terrible idea." Neither of them moved away. "What time is dinner at Miss Doris's?" she asked after a moment. 3. His thumb traced along her cheekbone, and she leaned into the touch. "We should probably. Probably." Instead, he dipped his head and kissed her again. Outside, seagulls called to each other over the crash of waves, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Normal island sounds on a normal Thanksgiving morning. Except nothing about this felt normal. Nothing about the way Mara was looking at him, or the way his heart was still racing, or the way he suddenly couldn't imagine spending another Thanksgiving, or any day, without her. "Landon," she said quietly a little while later. "Yeah? I'm glad you ran the race." He smiled, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Me too." Chapter 5. Mara kept replaying the morning's kisses while she got ready for Thanksgiving dinner at Miss Doris's house. Every time she touched her lips, she felt the warmth of Landon's mouth against hers, taste the coffee and promise that had lingered between them. She was digging through her suitcase for something nicer than jeans when a car door slammed outside. Through the bedroom window, she spotted Colton climbing out of his truck with a covered dish in his hands and that easy grin that had charmed half the island since he was 16. "Colton's here," she called downstairs. "I'll let him in." Mara pulled on a soft blue sweater and was applying mascara when she heard the murmur of male voices drifting up from downstairs. Something in their tone made her pause, lipstick halfway to her mouth. She crept to the top of the stairs, telling herself she wasn't eavesdropping. "Good to see you two getting along," Colton was saying. "We've always gotten along," Landon replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Have you?" Because from where I was standing yesterday, it looked like more than just getting along. A long pause. Mara held her breath. "Look," Colton continued, his voice dropping lower, "she's my sister, and you're my best friend. I don't want things to get weird between us." "It won't." "Won't it?" There was something gentle but firm in Colton's tone. "What if things don't work out?" "She's pretty vulnerable right now." Mara's cheeks burned. Of course Colton would see her as the mess-up little sister who couldn't get her life together. "I know that," Landon said quietly. "Do you?" "I know you, Landon. And she doesn't need someone treating her like a vacation fling while she's trying to figure out her life." "That's not. All I'm saying is that if you're not serious about this, then you need to back off. She deserves better than someone who's going to disappear when things get complicated." Mara sank down onto the top step, her stomach churning. Vacation fling. Was that what Colton thought this was? Was that what Landon thought? The conversation moved toward the kitchen, their voices becoming too muffled to make out words. Mara sat there for a long moment, staring at her hands and trying to process what she'd heard. Colton was protecting her, she knew that. But the way he'd talked about her, like she was some broken thing that needed handling with care, made her feel small and pathetic. And Landon hadn't exactly rushed to defend whatever was happening between them. She finished getting ready with mechanical precision, her earlier happiness curdling into anxiety. By the time she made it downstairs, Colton was gone and Landon was standing at the kitchen window, staring out at the ocean with his hands shoved in his pockets. "Where's Colton?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. "Went to pick up something for Miss Doris. He'll meet us there." Landon turned, and something flickered across his face when he saw her. "You look beautiful." "Thanks." The compliment should have warmed her, but instead it felt hollow. Was he just being polite? Playing his part until he could gracefully exit? Her phone buzzed with a text, and she was grateful for the distraction until she saw who it was from. "Brad. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you're doing well." She stared at the message, her throat tightening. "Everything okay?" Landon asked. Fine. Just my ex. She shoved the phone back in her purse. We should probably head over soon. Mara, about this morning. What about it? The words came out sharper than she'd intended. Landon studied her face. You seem different. Did something happen? Yes, she wanted to say. I remembered that I'm the girl who can't keep her life together, and you're the guy who has everything figured out. I'm fine, she said instead. Thinking about dinner. Should we bring wine? Before he could answer, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and frowned. Sorry, I need to take this. It's Jake, my business partner. He stepped out onto the back deck to answer, and Mara tried not to watch him through the glass door. But she could see his profile, the way he ran his hand through his hair as he talked. I know, but the permits got delayed, she heard him say as he paced closer to the door. Yeah, the Hartwell project. We'll have to push everything back. Mara turned away, not wanting to eavesdrop on his work call. But his next words stopped her cold. Don't worry about it. I'll be back to normal next week. Back to normal. Because she was just a distraction. A vacation fling, like Colton had said. The walk to Miss Doris's house felt longer than usual, the silence between them heavy and awkward. Mara kept her eyes on the sidewalk, acutely aware of Landon walking beside her with the careful distance of someone trying not to touch her accidentally. Nice day for it, he said finally, his voice overly casual. They made it another block before Mara couldn't stand it anymore. She stopped walking and turned to face him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Can I ask you something? Landon stopped too, wariness flickering across his features. Sure. This morning. The kisses. She forced herself to meet his eyes. Did they mean anything to you? The question hung in the air between them, and Mara watched a dozen emotions cross Landon's face, surprise, panic, something that might have been longing. But instead of answering immediately, he hesitated, shoving his hands deeper into his jacket pockets. Mara. It's a simple question, Landon. Yes or no? It's not that simple. Her stomach dropped. Isn't it? Look, we've both been staying in the same house, there's been tension, and maybe we got caught up in the moment. Caught up in the moment? Mara stared at him. That's what you think it was? I think we should be careful not to complicate things, he said carefully. You're Colton's sister, and I'm his best friend. You're figuring out your life, and I don't want to make that harder for you. Each word felt like a small knife. Make that harder for you. As if she were a problem to be managed, a complication to be avoided. Right, she said, her voice tight. Wouldn't want to complicate things. Mara, that's not what I meant. No, I think that's exactly what you meant. She started walking again, faster this time. Don't worry about it. I get the message. What message? Landon caught up to her easily. I'm trying to be respectful here. Of what? My delicate feelings? My inability to handle reality? She laughed bitterly. Trust me, I'm used to it. Used to what? Being the temporary option. The girl who's fine for right now but not someone you'd actually want to build anything with. Landon stopped walking again. That's not. It's fine, Mara cut him off, not trusting herself to hear whatever careful explanation he was about to offer. Actually, it works out perfectly. I got a text from my old boss yesterday. They want me back in Savannah. Full client list, raise, the works. It wasn't a lie. Just not an offer she'd seriously considered until this very moment. She watched Landon's face go carefully blank. That's great. Good for you. Yeah. It is good for me. She started walking again. I was thinking I might head back this weekend. Get settled before I start work again. This weekend? Something cracked in Landon's voice. But you said you were staying through next week. Plans change. They reached Miss Doris's front porch, and Mara could hear laughter and conversation drifting through the windows. The warm sounds of people enjoying each other's company, of belonging somewhere. She wanted to turn around and go home, to pack her bags and leave before she could humiliate herself any further. Instead, she pasted on a smile and knocked on the door. Miss Doris opened it with a flourish, wearing a festive apron and beaming at them both. "There you are. Perfect timing. Come in, come in." The house was full of warmth and the sense of turkey and pie. People gathered in the living room with drinks and easy conversation. Mara spotted Colton by the fireplace, talking to a couple she didn't recognize, and felt a wave of relief. At least she'd have someone to talk to. "Mara, dear, you look lovely," Miss Doris said, taking her jacket. "That color is perfect on you." "Thank you. Landon, there's tea in the kitchen if you want one." "Help yourself." Mara watched him disappear toward the back of the house without a backward glance. Good. Let him go drink beer and pretend this afternoon had never happened. "Everything all right?" Miss Doris asked quietly, her sharp eyes taking in Mara's expression. "Perfect," Mara said brightly. "Can I help with anything?" Chapter 6. Landon pushed mashed potatoes around his plate, his appetite completely gone. Across the table, Mara was laughing at something the man beside her had said, but it was the kind of bright, performative laugh that didn't reach her eyes. She hadn't looked at him once since they'd sat down. He'd messed this up spectacularly. The conversation with Colton had rattled him, brought back every insecurity about not being good enough, about the potential for losing the most important friendship in his life. So when Mara had asked if the kisses meant anything, he'd panicked. He'd said exactly the wrong thing in exactly the wrong way, and now she was planning to leave. "Landon, would you mind helping me in the kitchen?" Miss Doris's voice cut through his brooding. "I need someone tall to reach the good plates." He glanced around the table. Everyone else seemed absorbed in conversation, and Mara was still determinedly not looking at him. Of course. In the kitchen, Miss Doris handed him a stack of dessert plates from the top shelf, then fixed him with the kind of look that suggested she could see straight through him. "All right," she said, crossing her arms. "What did you do?" "I don't know what you mean." "Landon Kerr, I've known you since you were shorter than me. You've been sitting in there looking like someone ran over your dog, and Mara's been avoiding you like you have something contagious." Her eyes narrowed. "So I'll ask again. What did you do?" Landon set the plates on the counter with more force than necessary. "I tried to do the right thing." Which was? Not complicating things. Not making things harder for her when she's already dealing with enough. Miss Doris stared at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "Oh, honey. You really didn't learn anything, did you?" "Excuse me?" "Mara Winslow is not the 18-year-old girl who had a crush on you anymore. She's a grown woman who's been taking care of herself for years. She doesn't need you to protect her from her own feelings." Colton said. "I don't care what Colton said. This isn't about him." Miss Doris stepped closer, her voice gentle but firm. "This is about you and Mara. And you running scared." The words hit harder than he expected. "I'm not scared." "Aren't you?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're doing exactly what you did when she was 18, pushing her away because it feels safer than taking a risk." Landon felt something cold settle in his stomach. That was different. She was too young then. And now? Now she's leaving anyway. Going back to Savannah. Miss Doris tilted her head. Is she? Or is that a reaction because it's easier than admitting your feelings to each other? Before Landon could answer, the back door opened and Mara slipped outside onto the deck, her phone pressed to her ear. Through the window, he could see her pacing, her free hand gesturing as she talked. "That's not," he started. "Look at her, Landon," Miss Doris said quietly. "Really look at her. Does that look like a woman who's excited about going back to her old life?" Through the glass, Mara looked tense, almost angry. As he watched, she stopped pacing and said something sharp into the phone, then hung up and stood there for a moment, staring out at the water. You know what your problem is? Miss Doris continued. You've spent so long keeping yourself safe that you've forgotten how to take a chance on something good. I tried taking chances before. It didn't work out. So you're going to spend the rest of your life alone because one person hurt you? The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Landon thought about his empty house, his careful routines, the way he'd built a life that was stable and predictable and completely devoid of real joy. What if she leaves anyway? He asked quietly. What if she doesn't? Miss Doris patted his arm. Honey, the only way you're guaranteed to lose her is if you don't try. Mara came back inside a few minutes later, and Landon intercepted her in the hallway. Everything okay? He asked. You seemed upset during that call. She looked at him for a moment, then shrugged. Dealing with some things back in Savannah. Nothing I can't handle. Mara. I should get back to dinner, she said, stepping around him. Miss Doris will wonder where we went. As she walked away, Landon felt the weight of everything unsaid between them. She was handling things in Savannah. Probably finalizing her plans to leave. The thought made his chest tighten, but Miss Doris's words kept echoing in his head. The only way you're guaranteed to lose her is if you don't try. Back at the dinner table, he watched Mara rejoin the conversation, her smile brighter now but still not reaching her eyes when she looked his way. Around them, people were finishing their pie, the conversation warm and easy. This was what he'd been protecting himself from. The risk of putting himself out there and getting hurt. But looking at Mara, he realized that protecting himself had cost him everything that mattered. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Conversations died as everyone looked at him. Sorry, he said, his heart hammering. I would like to say something. Miss Doris's eyes twinkled with anticipation. Colton looked curious. And Mara was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. I know it's traditional to say what you're thankful for, Landon began, his voice steadier than he felt. And I'm thankful for all the usual things. Good friends, good food, this community that's given me so much. He looked around the table, then let his gaze settle on Mara. But this year, I'm especially thankful for old friends who surprise you. For second chances you didn't know you needed. And for the courage to build something new instead of just protecting what you have. Mara's eyes widened slightly, her lips parting as if she wanted to say something. I'm thankful for people who challenge you to be better than you thought you could be, he continued, his voice growing stronger. Who make you realize that playing it safe isn't really living at all. He set down his napkin and walked around the table, ignoring the interested murmurs from the other guests. When he reached Mara's chair, he held out his hand. I know you're going back to Savannah, he said quietly. And I know I have no right to ask you to change your plans. She stared at his outstretched hand, confusion flickering across her face. But I want you to know that if there's any part of you that wants to try this, I'm willing to figure it out. Long distance, me visiting you, whatever it takes. His voice grew stronger. I don't want to lose you again because I was too scared to fight for what I want. Landon. I love you, he said, the words coming out rough but sure. I've loved you since you were 18 and told me how you felt, and I was too scared and stupid to do anything about it. I've loved you every day since you left, and I've been pretending I didn't because it felt safer. Tears were gathering in Mara's eyes. You said we shouldn't complicate things. I was wrong. You don't complicate my life, Mara. You make it worth living. She took his hand then, letting him pull her to her feet. I turned down the job, she whispered. What? The phone call. I told my old boss I wasn't going back. Her smile was tremulous but genuine. I'm staying, Landon. Relief flooded through him so completely he felt dizzy. You are? Not because of you, she said quickly, then softened. Well, not entirely because of you. Because this is where I want to be. Where I want to build my life. And is there room in that life for a guy who's terrible at expressing his feelings and took way too long to figure out what he wanted? That depends, she said, stepping closer. Are you done being scared? Terrified, he admitted. But I'm done letting fear make my decisions. He cupped her face in his hands, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. I love you, Mara Winslow. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving it. Yes, she whispered, and then he was kissing her, soft and deep and full of promise, while applause broke out around them. When they finally broke apart, breathless and grinning, Colton was shaking his head with a bemused smile. About time. Miss Doris was practically glowing with satisfaction. I do love a happy ending, she announced to the table. Now, who wants more pie? Landon barely heard the renewed chatter around the table. He was too busy looking at Mara, at the way she was smiling up at him like he'd just given her everything she'd ever wanted. Can we talk? He said quietly. Privately? She nodded, and they slipped out onto Miss Doris's back deck, the cool evening air a welcome relief after the warmth of the crowded house. I owe you an apology, Landon said, leaning against the railing. Actually, I owe you several. Just several? This afternoon, when you asked if the kisses meant anything, I should have said yes. They meant everything. You mean everything. Mara's expression softened. Why didn't you? Because Colton cornered me earlier, told me you'd been through enough this year and that I shouldn't mess you around. He ran a hand through his hair. And because I'm an idiot who thought protecting you from my feelings was somehow noble. Protecting me from your feelings? I watched you drive away once before, Mara. It nearly killed me then, and I convinced myself it would be easier if I kept some distance this time. He looked at her, seeing the hurt still lingering in her eyes. I was wrong. About all of it. She was quiet for a moment, then said, I heard you on the phone earlier. You said you'd be back to normal next week. Understanding dawned. You thought I meant without you. Didn't you? I was talking about a construction project. The permits got delayed, so we had to push back the timeline. He stepped closer. Mara, when I said normal, I didn't mean without you in it. I'll always make room for you. She studied his face, searching for something. You really love me? So much it scares me, he admitted. I know I handled today badly, but if you'll give me another chance. I love you too, she said, the words rushing out. I've been trying not to, because I thought you saw me as Colton's little sister, or a vacation fling, or just someone passing through. But I've loved you for so long, Landon. He pulled her into his arms then, holding her tight against his chest. I'm sorry I made you doubt that. I'm sorry I wasted so much time being scared. We both wasted time, she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. But maybe we needed it. Maybe we needed to become the people we are now before we could make this work. He pulled back to look at her. And now? Now I think we have some making up for lost time to do. Landon smiled, the expression feeling like it came from somewhere deep inside him that had been locked away for years. I like the sound of that. Good, she said, rising up on her toes to kiss him. Because I'm thinking of opening a salon here on the island. Somebody's going to have to help me find the right location. I know a guy in construction, he said against her lips. He might be able to help with renovations. Perfect, she whispered. I was hoping you'd say that. Epilogue. Palmar Island, 1 year later. Mara stood in Miss Doris's kitchen, arranging fresh flowers in a vase and listening to the cheerful chaos of Thanksgiving dinner preparation. The house was fuller this year. Her parents were here, and Miss Doris had invited what seemed like half the island to join their celebration. Mara, dear, could you check on the sweet potatoes? Miss Doris called from across the kitchen, where she was arranging the turkey on a silver platter. On it, Mara replied, sliding the casserole dish from the oven. The smell of brown sugar and cinnamon filled the air, mixing with the scents of sage stuffing and fresh bread rolls. Through the kitchen window, she could see Landon on the back deck with her father, both men gesturing animatedly as they discussed some construction project. Her dad had taken an immediate liking to Landon, bonding over their shared appreciation for well-built things and poorly told jokes. Look at you, her mother said, appearing at her elbow with a warm smile. You're glowing. It's probably the heat from the oven, Mara said, but she was smiling too. It was impossible not to smile these days. The past year had been everything she'd dreamed of and more. The salon she'd opened with Sarah had exceeded all their expectations. Apparently, there had been a real need for quality hair services on the island. Between tourists wanting beachy waves and locals needing regular cuts and colors, they'd been booked solid since opening day. But more than that, she'd found her place here. Not just as Colton's little sister or someone's girlfriend, but as Mara Winslow, business owner, island resident, part of the community that had welcomed her home with open arms. He makes you happy, her mother observed, following her gaze to where Landon was now laughing at something her father had said. He does. I'm glad. Your father and I always liked him, you know. Even when you were teenagers with that hopeless crush. Mara felt her cheeks warm. Mom. What? It's true. We always thought you two would figure it out eventually. Even with your brother doing his best to keep the two of you apart. The front door opened with a bang, and Colton's voice carried through the house. I brought pie and gossip. The gossip better be good, Miss Doris called back. We've had a very peaceful year, and I'm running out of things to speculate about. Colton appeared in the kitchen doorway, grinning and holding a covered pie dish. Don't worry, Miss Doris. I'm sure you'll find something. He set the pie on the counter and pulled Mara into a hug. Hey, sis. How's island life treating you? Can't complain, she said, squeezing him back. Business is good, I love being back home. And I love not having to worry about you moping around feeling sorry for yourself, he said with a grin. I did not mope. You absolutely moped. Very dramatically. He dodged her elbow and turned to survey the kitchen. Though I have to say, you and Landon have been suspiciously well behaved this year. Last Thanksgiving was much more entertaining. We were not entertaining, Mara protested. It was something, Miss Doris added with a chuckle. Though I have to say, things have been much calmer this year. Mara caught the slight emphasis on the word this and the way Miss Doris's eyes were twinkling with barely contained excitement. Before she could wonder what that meant, Landon appeared in the kitchen, looking slightly windblown and incredibly handsome in his navy sweater. Your dad's inspecting the deck railings, he told Miss Doris. He says they're solid, but he wants to show me his technique for weatherproofing. Of course he does, Mara's mother said fondly. He can't help himself. Mara, Landon said, his voice casual but his eyes holding something that made her pulse quicken. Want to take a walk before dinner? The sunset should be pretty spectacular tonight. She glanced around the kitchen, where everything seemed to be under control. Sure. They slipped out the door and walked hand in hand toward the beach, the November air crisp but not cold. The sky was beginning to turn pink and gold at the horizon, painting the water in shades of rose and amber. Busy day, Landon said as they made their way down to the shore. Good busy, though. I love having everyone together like this. Me too. He squeezed her hand. Your parents seem to be having a good time. They are. Dad's already planning his next project around the house. I think he's eyeing the guest bathroom for a renovation. After that, he mentioned a couple of things he could fix up at my place. And how do you feel about that? Mara considered the question. A year ago, the thought of her parents being so involved in her daily life might have made her feel suffocated. Now, having a cozy apartment above the salon and her own thriving business, it just felt like being part of the community again. I think it's nice having them close by, she said. Assuming we can keep them from meddling too much. We? She looked at him, noting the way his free hand was fidgeting with something in his jacket pocket. Landon? You okay? Perfect, he said, but his voice sounded slightly strained. Actually, no. I'm nervous. About dinner? Miss Doris has everything under control. Not about dinner. He stopped walking and turned to face her, the sunset painting his face in warm golden light. Mara, this past year has been the best year of my life. Her heart started beating faster. Mine too. You've made everything better. My house feels like a home now, my work feels more meaningful, and I wake up every day excited about what we're building together. Landon. He dropped to one knee in the sand, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Mara's breath caught in her throat as he opened it to reveal a simple, elegant solitaire that caught the last rays of sunlight and threw them back in brilliant sparkles. I love you, Mara Winslow, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I love your laugh, your determination, the way you've made this island feel like home in a way I never thought possible. I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me. Tears were streaming down her cheeks now, but she was smiling so hard her face hurt. Yes, she whispered. I haven't asked the question yet, he said, grinning. Yes to whatever you're about to ask. Mara Winslow, will you marry me? Yes, she said again, more firmly this time. Yes, absolutely, completely yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he kissed her soft and deep, tasting like promises and forever. I love you, she said against his lips. I love you so much. Good, he said, because you're stuck with me now. They walked back to the house hand in hand, Mara's ring catching the porch light as they climbed the steps. Inside, the dinner party was in full swing, but conversation died as soon as they appeared in the doorway. Well? Miss Doris asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. Mara held up her left hand, and the room erupted in cheers and applause. Her mother burst into happy tears, her father clapped Landon on the back so hard he stumbled, and Colton let out a whoop that probably carried all the way to the mainland. I knew it! Miss Doris exclaimed, practically bouncing with excitement. I have champagne chilled, just in case. You do? Landon asked. Oh honey, you've been carrying that ring around for a month. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Mara looked at her fiancé with raised eyebrows. A month? I wanted it to be perfect, he said, looking slightly embarrassed. The right moment, the right setting. It was perfect, she assured him, then turned to the room. This is all perfect. Miss Doris appeared with a tray of champagne glasses, her eyes twinkling with delight. To Mara and Landon, she announced, raising her glass. May your marriage be everything your courtship was. Full of love, laughter, and just enough drama to keep things interesting. To Mara and Landon, everyone echoed. As they toasted and celebrated, surrounded by the people who'd become their chosen family, Mara thought about the scared, heartbroken woman who'd arrived on this island just over a year ago. She'd come here running from her old life, with no plan and no idea what came next. She'd found everything she'd been looking for, and some things she hadn't even known she needed. Happy? Landon asked quietly, his arm around her waist as the party swirled around them. Beyond happy, she said, leaning into his warmth. Ready for whatever comes next. Good, he said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Because I have a feeling it's going to be quite an adventure. Mara smiled, her engagement ring sparkling in the warm light of Miss Doris's dining room, surrounded by laughter and love and the promise of all the seasons to come. She couldn't wait. The end. This has been Season of Thanks. Written by Susanne Ash. Copyright 2025 by Susanne Ash. Production copyright 2025 by Susanne Ash. Thanks for listening. Please like and subscribe if you want me to put more of my books on YouTube. Visit my website at www.susanneash.com for more of my books or find me on Amazon.